Commander Lisa Morgan stood on the bridge of the Destiny's Edge, watching the star charts flicker across the holographic display before her. The research vessel had been traveling through the outer regions of the Andromeda border for 3 weeks, now searching for ancient ruins that might hold clues to early spacefaring civilizations. Lisa was a woman who thrived on discovery, and the unknown regions of space called to her like nothing else ever had. Her crew of 40 scientists and support staff were some of the best humanity had to offer, and she trusted them with her life. Maya Rodriguez, the chief engineer, was running diagnostics on the scanning array, while Kate Sullivan, the security officer, monitored the communication channels for any signs of Galactic Council patrols. The Council did not approve of human vessels venturing this far into uncharted space, but Lisa had never been one to follow rules that made no sense. Suddenly, the scanning array began emitting a strange pulsing sound that filled the bridge with an eerie rhythm. Maya looked up from her console with wide eyes and called out to Lisa that they were picking up a signal unlike anything she had ever seen before. The signal was old, incredibly old, and it was coming from a planet that, according to all official records, should have been dead for millions of years. Lisa felt her heart race with excitement as she ordered the ship to change course toward the source of the signal. The planet designated as Etherian, prime in the old star charts, looked barren from orbit with gray continents and dried ocean beds that spoke of a world long dead. But the signal was definitely coming from somewhere on the surface, pulsing with a regular pattern that suggested intelligence. Behind its creation, Kate warned Lisa that this violated at least 6 different Galactic Council regulations about approaching forbidden worlds. Lisa smiled and told her that sometimes the best discoveries came from breaking the rules. The Destiny's Edge entered orbit, and Lisa assembled a landing team consisting of herself, Maya, Kate, and 3 other specialists. They took a shuttle down through the thin atmosphere, watching as the gray landscape grew closer. Ancient ruins began to appear on the surface, massive structures that defied explanation with architecture that seemed to blend organic and geometric forms in ways that human or council buildings never did. The shuttle landed near what appeared to be the source of the signal, a towering, crystalline structure that rose from the ground like a frozen waterfall. Lisa and her team exited the shuttle wearing environmental suits, even though the atmosphere readings showed the air was breathable if thin. The crystal structure hummed with energy as they approached, and Lisa could feel something pulling her forward like an invisible hand, guiding her steps. Inside the structure, they found a vast chamber with walls that seemed to pulse with inner light. At the center of the chamber stood 2 massive stasis pods made of a material that looked like crystal and metal fused together. Inside one pod was a woman, or at least something that looked human-like, with features that were almost too perfect to be real. Her ears tapered to elegant points, and her skin had a faint luminescent quality, even in stasis. Her hair was long and silver, flowing around her face like it was suspended in water. Beside her, in a much larger pod, was a creature that made Lisa catch her breath in wonder. It was massive, easily the size of a shuttle, with scales that seemed to shift colors even while frozen in time. The creature had wings folded against its body, and a long serpentine neck ending in a head that was both beautiful and terrifying. Its form was dragon-like, but there was something about it that suggested intelligence far beyond any animal. Maya began scanning the pods with her equipment, and her readings made no sense. The stasis technology was beyond anything humanity or the Council had ever developed, and the energy signatures suggested the pods had been active for at least 20,000 years. Lisa made a decision that would change everything. She ordered Maya to find a way to open the pods. Maya protested, saying they had no idea what might happen. But Lisa insisted that whoever these beings were, they deserved to be freed. It took Maya 2 hours to decode enough of the ancient systems to initiate a wake sequence. The pods began to glow brighter, and the humming sound grew louder, until it filled the entire chamber. Slowly, the crystal surfaces of the pods began to dissolve, turning into mist that evaporated into the air. The woman opened her eyes, and they glowed with an inner light that was both green and gold. She took a breath and sat up, looking around the chamber with confusion written across her perfect features. Her gaze fell on Lisa and her team, and she spoke in a language that sounded like music and wind chimes. The translation software in their suits struggled to make sense of her words, but slowly began to parse meaning from the ancient dialect. The woman identified herself as Arya, though whether that was a name or a title was unclear. She asked about something called the Great War, and wanted to know if the old alliance still stood. Lisa had no idea what she was talking about, and told her that they were from Earth and that humanity had been exploring space for only a few hundred years. Arya looked shocked and then sad, as if Lisa had told her something terrible. Before they could continue the conversation, the dragon began to wake. Its eyes opened, revealing orbs of swirling color that seemed to contain entire galaxies. The creature rose to its feet and let out a sound that was part roar and part song. Looked at the humans, and Lisa saw intelligence in those eyes that matched or exceeded her own. The dragon turned its gaze to Arya, and something passed between them without words. Arya reached out and touched the dragon's scaled snout, calling it Eclipse. In a voice full of affection, Eclipse calmed at her touch but kept watching the humans with wary attention. Lisa tried to explain that they meant no harm, and that they had awakened them because the signal had drawn them here. Arya listened, and then asked about the Galactic Council, using words that the translator rendered as guardians or watchers. Lisa confirmed that yes, there was a Galactic Council that governed most of known space areas. Expression darkened, and she said something that the translator struggled with, but the general meaning was clear. The council should not exist, or perhaps more accurately, the council was not supposed to be in charge. Before Lisa could ask what she meant, alarms began blaring from her suit communicator. Kate shouted that they had multiple ships dropping out of faster-than-light travel in orbit, council warships, at least a dozen of them, and they were powering weapons. Lisa ordered everyone back to the shuttle immediately. Arya and Eclipse followed, moving with a grace that seemed impossible for beings who had been asleep for 20 millennia. They barely made it back to the Destiny's Edge before the Council fleet opened fire. The lead ship identified itself as belonging to Admiral Zekthor of the Kryn Dominion. His voice came through the communication channel demanding that Lisa surrender the awakened beings immediately. He claimed they were dangerous, forbidden entities that violated ancient protocols. Lisa refused, asking by what authority the Council could make such demands. Zekthor did not bother answering with words. Instead, his ships opened fire on the Destiny's Edge with enough firepower to crack a moon. The human vessel's shields held for maybe 10 seconds before failing. Explosions rocked the ship as weapons fire tore through the hull. Lisa ordered all hands to emergency evacuation pods and grabbed Arya's arm, pulling her toward the nearest escape route. Maya and Kate were already running, with Eclipse moving behind them surprisingly fast for something so large. The dragon seemed to understand the danger and followed without hesitation. They made it to the pod bay as the ship began breaking apart around them. Lisa shoved everyone into the largest emergency pod designed for cargo, but big enough for all of them, including Eclipse, who had to curl his body tight to fit. The pod launched just as the Destiny's Edge exploded behind them. Through the small viewport, Lisa watched her ship, her home, die in flames. Worse, she watched the other pods being picked off one by Council fighters. Most of her crew never made it out. The few pods that did escape were hunted down and destroyed. Only their pod managed to slip away using the debris field. For cover, Lisa felt rage building inside her chest as she realized that the Council had just murdered 35 innocent people. Maya was crying quietly, and Kate had her fists clenched so tight her knuckles were white. Arya watched the destruction with ancient eyes and spoke softly. She said this was why she and her kind had gone to sleep. She said the Guardians had become tyrants. She said humanity needed to know the truth before it was too late. Eclipse let out a low rumbling sound that vibrated through the pod like distant thunder. Lisa looked at the mysterious elf woman and her dragon companion and realized that whatever secrets they held, the Galactic Council was willing to kill to keep them buried. She set course for the nearest human colony and began composing a message to Earth. The Council had just made a terrible mistake. They had attacked a human ship and murdered human civilians. They had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. Lisa did not know what Arya and Eclipse represented, or what truth they carried. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty: humanity would not let this stand. The emergency pod drifted through space for 6 hours before Lisa managed to get the damaged communications array working again. She sent out a distress signal on human frequencies and prayed that someone friendly would find them before the Council patrols did. Maya worked on repairing the pod's life support systems, while Kate kept watch through the viewport F. Or any signs of approaching ship's area sat quietly in the corner with Eclipse's massive head resting in her lap, and both of them seemed to be communicating without words. Lisa noticed that sometimes when Arya closed her eyes, Eclipse would also close his eyes, and they would both become very still as if sharing the same dream. Finally, a response came through on the human channel. A mining colony called Haven's Rest had picked up their signal and was sending a transport to collect them. Lisa felt relief wash over her as she realized they might actually survive this. The transport arrived 3 hours later and brought them safely to the colony, which was built into a massive asteroid in the outer rim of human-controlled space. The colony administrator was a tough woman named Rachel Kim, who listened to Lisa's story with growing anger. Rachel immediately offered them shelter and promised that no council ship would take them. While she still breathed, Haven's Rest was one of the independent colonies that had never trusted the Galactic Council, and Rachel had always believed that the Council was hiding something important from humanity. Lisa and her small group of survivors were given quarters in the deeper levels of the colony where they could rest and recover. Arya and Eclipse were given a large cargo bay that had been converted into living space. That first night, Lisa could not sleep. Her mind kept replaying the destruction of her ship and the death of her crew over and over. She was sitting alone in the common area when Arya found her. The elf woman sat down beside Lisa and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Arya told her that she understood loss and that the pain Lisa felt was the price of caring about others. Then Arya said something strange. She said that Lisa's mind was strong and clear, and that if Lisa was willing, Arya could share her memories so that Lisa would understand why the Council had attacked them. Lisa agreed without hesitation. She needed to know what was worth 35 human lives. Arya reached out and touched Lisa's forehead, and suddenly Lisa was somewhere else. She was experiencing Arya's memories as if they were her own. Lisa saw a galaxy that was alive with countless civilizations, all working together in harmony. Saw humans, but not the humans of the present day. These were humans from so long ago that their technology made the current Galactic Council look primitive by comparison. She saw Arya's people, the Ylthari, who were elegant and powerful beings with mastery over energy and life itself. She saw the dragons, not just Eclipse, but hundreds of them, flying between worlds and stars as easily as birds flew through air. These three species, along with others, had formed something called the Covenant of Stars. They were explorers and builders and protectors of life throughout the galaxy. But then the vision darkened. Something came from beyond the galaxy. Something that the Covenant called the Devourers. They were a hive mind species that consumed entire worlds, stripping them of all life and matter. The Devourers spread like a plague across the outer arms of the galaxy, destroying everything in their path. The Covenant fought back, and the war that followed was beyond anything Lisa could comprehend. Entire star systems were used as weapons. The fabric of space itself was torn and reshaped. Billions died on both sides. Lisa saw Arya standing before councils of humans, dragons, and other Ylthari. She was a diplomat, one of the chief architects of the alliance that held the Covenant together during the darkest times. Eclipse was bonded to her not as a pet, but as an equal partner. Their connection went deeper than friendship or family. They were two parts of one whole. The war raged for centuries until finally, the Covenant found a way to trap the Devourers. Using technology that bent reality itself, they created a barrier in dark space, a prison that would hold the Devourers for eternity. But maintaining the barrier required immense power, more power than any ship or station could provide. The Ylthari and the dragons volunteered to become the power source. They would enter stasis chambers scattered across the galaxy, and their life energy would feed the barrier, keeping the Devourers trapped forever. Thousands of Yltharian dragons went into the sleep, knowing they might never wake. Arya was among them, as was Eclipse. But humanity suffered terribly in the war. Entire worlds were lost, and the human population was reduced to a fraction of what it had been. The surviving humans had to start over almost from scratch. Their advanced technology was destroyed, and their history was lost. Over thousands of years, humanity forgot about the Covenant and the Great War. They thought they were new to the stars when, in truth, they were returning to them. The vision shifted and Lisa saw something that made her blood run cold. The species that would become the Galactic Council, the Kryn, the Vex Collective, the Talarian Empire were not ancient spacefaring civilizations. They were uplifted by the Covenant. They were given technology and knowledge and tasked with one sacred duty. They were supposed to guard the stasis chambers and maintain the barrier. They were supposed to protect the sleeping Elthari and dragons until the time came to wake them. But over millennia, the Guardians became corrupt. They discovered the power contained in the ancient technology and decided they wanted it for themselves. They rewrote history, erasing all evidence of the Covenant. They claimed to be the original spacefaring species and positioned themselves as the rulers of the galaxy. When they found the stasis chambers, they destroyed them. They murdered sleeping Elthari and dragons to ensure that no one would ever challenge their version of history. The vision ended and Lisa found herself back in the common area. Gasping for breath, Arya was watching her with sad, ancient eyes. Lisa understood now. The Galactic Council was built on a lie. They had betrayed their sacred duty and committed genocide against the very beings who had saved the galaxy. Arya explained that she did not know how many of her people still survived in stasis. She could feel some of them through the ancient connection network. But many chambers felt empty and cold. Eclipse had been trying to reach out to other dragons, but the responses were few. Lisa asked why Arya had stayed asleep for so long. Arya said that the barrier was designed to wake the sleepers automatically if the devourers ever threatened to break free, but that had never happened, which meant the barrier was holding. They were supposed to sleep until the danger passed completely. But Arya suspected now that the Council had been tampering with the wake-up systems, keeping the Elthari and dragons asleep. Deliberately, Lisa made a decision in that moment. She contacted Rachel Kim and asked to use the colony's long-range communication array. She needed to contact Earth, and she needed to do it now. Rachel agreed, and within hours, Lisa was speaking to Director Amanda Price, who headed up human intelligence operations. Amanda was skeptical at first when Lisa told her about the Ancient Alliance and the Covenant of Stars. But Lisa sent her the data they had collected from the ruins on Etherian Prime, and Amanda promised to investigate. Over the next week, Amanda's team made startling discoveries. They found evidence that had been hidden in old archaeological surveys, ancient human ruins that showed technology far beyond what should have existed. Every time human scientists had found something that did not fit the official timeline, the Galactic Council had confiscated it. The Council had been actively suppressing human history for over a century. Amanda brought her findings to the Earth government, and suddenly, everything changed. Politicians who had always trusted the Council began asking difficult questions. Military leaders who had followed Council regulations started reviewing old incidents with new eyes. Meanwhile, Arya began the process of trying to locate other stasis chambers. She meditated with Eclipse for hours at a time, reaching out through the ancient network. She found several chambers that were still active, but they were scattered across the galaxy. Some were in neutral space, but others were in Council-controlled territory. Worse, she found evidence that the Council knew where many of the chambers were located. They had been systematically destroying them over the past 1,000 years. Each destroyed chamber weakened the barrier just a little bit more. Arya feared that if too many chambers were destroyed, the barrier might fail completely. The Devourers would break free, and this time there would be no covenant to stop them. 2 weeks after the destruction of the Destiny's Edge, the Galactic Council made an official announcement. They claimed that Arya was a dangerous war criminal from an ancient conflict. They said Eclipse was a forbidden bioweapon that violated all treaties. They demanded that humanity surrender both of them. Within 48 hours, if humanity refused, the Council would impose a complete embargo on human space. They would cut off all trade and all diplomatic relations. They also hinted at possible military action if humanity continued to harbor the criminals. Announcement was broadcast across all Council channels for every species to see. The Council was painting humanity as reckless and dangerous. They claimed humans had unleashed ancient horrors that threatened galactic peace. Lisa watched the announcement with growing fury. She was sitting with Maya and Kate in their quarters on Haven's Rest. Maya was shaking with anger, saying that the Council had murdered their crew, and now they were lying to the entire galaxy about it. Kate was quieter. but Lisa could see the rage burning in her eyes. Arya and Eclipse joined them, and Arya said something that surprised everyone. She said that humanity had a choice to make. They could surrender her and Eclipse to the Council and hope that would satisfy them, or they could stand and fight for the truth. Arya made it clear that she would not blame humanity if they chose to surrender. She and Eclipse had already slept for 20,000 years. What was one more death after all that time? But Lisa looked at Arya and shook her head. She said that humanity did not abandon friends and did not bow to bullies. The Council had fired first. They had killed innocent people. They had tried to bury the truth. Lisa said that if the Council wanted a fight, then humanity would give them one. Maya and Kate both agreed immediately. Rachel Kim sent a message saying that Haven's Rest and a dozen other independent colonies would stand with them. Director Amanda Price reported that Earth's government was divided, but that public opinion was shifting rapidly in favor of resistance. Protests were erupting across human worlds. People were angry that the Council had attacked a civilian research vessel. They were angry that the Council had been hiding human history. They were angry at being treated like children who could not be trusted with the truth. The 48-hour deadline was approaching. Earth's President Claire Bennett was under immense pressure from all sides. Some advisors wanted to negotiate and find a peaceful solution. Others wanted to fight back against Council aggression. Lisa received a private communication from Fleet Admiral Rebecca. Rebecca was the commander of all human military forces, and she had a reputation as someone who did not back down from a fight. Rebecca told Lisa that the military was ready. They had been preparing for the possibility of conflict with the Council. For years, humanity had secret weapons programs that violated Council treaties. They had ships and weapons that the Council did not know about. If the government gave the order, the military would strike hard and fast. Lisa felt hope for the first time. Since the Destiny's Edge had been destroyed, maybe humanity was not as weak as the Council believed. Maybe the galaxy was about to learn what happened when you pushed humans too far. The deadline passed, and humanity's answer was clear. President Bennett gave a speech that was broadcast across all human worlds. She spoke about the attack on the Destiny's Edge. She spoke about the Council's lies and their suppression of human history. She spoke about Arya and Eclipse and the truth they represented, and then she said the words that would change everything. She said that the Galactic Council had crossed the line. She said that humanity would not surrender. She said that humanity would stand and fight for the truth no matter the cost. The speech ended with a simple declaration. Humanity was at war with the Galactic Council, and this time humanity would not hold back. The declaration of war sent shockwaves through both human and Council space. President Claire Bennett sat in her office on Earth, surrounded by advisors who were all shouting different opinions about what should happen next. Some wanted to immediately recall the declaration and try to negotiate peace. Others demanded that humanity strike first before the Council could mobilize their full military might. Claire felt the weight of billions of lives resting on her shoulders. She had made the declaration because it felt right, because humanity could not simply bow to threats and murder. But now she had to face the reality of what war with the Galactic Council would actually mean. The Council had hundreds of worlds and thousands of warships. Humanity had maybe 50 colonies and a few hundred military vessels. On paper, it was not even close to a fair fight. Meanwhile, Fleet Admiral Rebecca Hart was already mobilizing the human military. She pulled ships from patrol duties and activated reserve crews. She sent orders to secret shipyards that humanity had built in hidden asteroid fields far from Council observation. These shipyards had been constructing vessels that violated every Council treaty on weapons and warfare. Rebecca had always believed that the Council could not be trusted, and now her paranoia was proving justified. The Council wasted no time in responding to humanity's defiance. Admiral Zekthor, who had destroyed the Destiny's Edge, was given command of what the Council called a peacekeeping force. His mission was to find and capture Arya and Eclipse by any means necessary. Zekthor began by ordering all human vessels in Council space to submit to immediate inspection. Any ship that refused would be seized and its crew arrested. The first confrontations happened within days. human merchant ships that had been trading peacefully with Council worlds suddenly found themselves surrounded by warships. Some captains submitted to the searches and watched as Council troops tore apart their ships looking for any sign of the fugitives. Other captains refused and tried to flee. Most of those ships were destroyed. Lisa Morgan watched the news reports from Haven's Rest with growing horror. She saw footage of human ships being blown apart by Council weapons. She saw interviews with survivors who described being beaten and interrogated by Council troops. The Council was not just searching for Aria and Eclipse. They were sending a message to all of humanity about what happened when you defied them. Kate Sullivan wanted to fight back immediately. She argued that they should take Aria and Eclipse and go on the offensive. Maya Rodriguez was more cautious, saying they needed to be smart about this. Aria herself remained quiet, watching the events unfold with ancient sadness in her eyes. Eclipse could sense the tension, and his scales rippled with barely contained energy. Breaking point came 2 weeks after the war declaration. A human space station called Frontier 7 refused to allow Council troops to board without proper warrants. The station commander was a woman named Nicole Foster, who had served in the human military for 20 years. Nicole knew the law, and she knew that the Council had no legal authority to search a human station without permission from Earth government. She sent a message to Zekthor saying that his forces were welcome to wait outside. While she contacted Earth for instructions, Zekthor's response was to open fire. The Council warships unleashed everything they had on Frontier 7. The station's shields lasted maybe 30 seconds before collapsing. Then the weapon's fire tore through, the hull shredding metal and vaporizing everything inside. 3,000 people lived on Frontier 7, scientists and miners and families with children. None of them had any chance to escape. The attack lasted less than 5 minutes, and when it was over, there was nothing left but debris. The footage was captured by automated satellites and broadcast across human space within hours. People watched in horror as the station was destroyed. They watched as escape pods were targeted and blown apart. They watched as 3,000 innocent lives were snuffed out. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Protests erupted on every human world. People stormed government buildings demanding action. Veterans from humanity's smaller conflicts volunteered en masse to join the military. The debate about whether war was justified ended in an instant. The Council had just murdered 3,000 civilians and done it in a way that left no doubt about their intentions. President Bennett called an emergency session of the Human Congress. She stood before them and spoke about Nicole Foster and the 3,000 souls who had died. She spoke about how the Council had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. She asked for full authorization to prosecute the war with every resource humanity possessed. The vote was unanimous. Humanity was committed now, and there would be no turning back. Lisa received word that she was being recalled to active duty. Her experience with Aria and Eclipse made her uniquely valuable. Director Amanda Price wanted her to lead special operations teams that would work directly with the awakened. Elthari Lisa accepted immediately. She was tired of hiding and tired of watching others die. It was time to take the fight to the Council. But first, Aria had something important to do. She had been sensing something through the ancient network, a presence that felt familiar. She told Lisa that there was another stasis chamber relatively close to their position. The chamber was on an abandoned moon in a system that was technically neutral territory. Aria needed to go there, and she needed to go now. Lisa, Maya, and Kate accompanied Aria and Eclipse on a fast courier ship borrowed from Haven's Rest. The journey took 3 days, and the entire time Aria seemed increasingly anxious. Eclipse was restless, too constantly shifting and making low rumbling sounds. When they arrived at the moon, Lisa understood why Aria was so worried. The stasis chamber was located in a deep cavern system beneath the surface. But as they descended into the caves, they found signs of recent activity. Blast marks on the walls and debris that suggested someone had been here not long ago. They found the chamber at the heart of the deepest cavern. It was similar to the one where Lisa had found Aria and Eclipse, but there was something terribly wrong. The chamber had been opened, and the stasis pod inside was shattered. Inside the broken pod was the body of an Elthari woman. She looked so much like Aria that Lisa knew immediately this was someone important. Arya let out a sound that was part scream and part sob. She rushed to the broken pod and gathered the body in her arms. The woman had been murdered while still in stasis, never given a chance to wake or defend herself. Arya held her sister's body and wept. Eclipse moved close, pressing his massive head against Arya in a gesture of comfort and shared grief. The dragon's eyes glowed with anger, and something in the air around them began to change. Lisa felt the temperature rising and saw small objects beginning to float off the ground. Maya shouted a warning, but it was too late. Eclipse threw his head back and roared. The sound was beyond anything Lisa had ever heard. It was not just noise, but something that resonated through reality itself. The cavern walls cracked and the ground shook. Lisa felt the roar in her bones, in her mind, in her soul. Eclipse's scales began to glow within her. His wings spread wide, filling the entire chamber. Flames erupted from his mouth. But these were not normal flames. They burned with colors that hurt to look at, and the heat they gave off was impossible. The flames melted stone and twisted space itself. This was Eclipse's true power. This was what a dragon could do when it stopped holding back. Arya stood holding her sister's body, and her own eyes began to glow. She reached out through her bond with Eclipse and channeled his rage, his grief, his power together. They created something that Lisa would never forget, a pulse of energy that exploded outward from the chamber. It was not physical but psychic, mental, spiritual. Lisa felt it pass through her like a wave, and for a moment she could hear Arya's voice in her mind. But the voice was not speaking to her. It was speaking to every stasis chamber that still existed across the galaxy. Arya was calling to her people. She was telling them to wake up. She was telling them that the Guardians had betrayed them. She was telling them that the Covenant was needed again. The pulse faded and Eclipse's flames died down. Arya collapsed to her knees, still holding her sister Maya, and Kate rushed to help her while Lisa stood in shock, trying to process what had just happened. They buried Arya's sister in the deepest part of the cavern. Arya spoke words in the ancient language, and Eclipse sang a mourning song that made the stones weep. Then they returned to their ship and headed back to Haven's Rest. On the journey back, Lisa received an urgent message from Director Amanda Price. Amanda had been coordinating with human intelligence agents across the galaxy. They had discovered something critical. The Council knew the locations of dozens of stasis chambers. Admiral Zekthor had already dispatched death squads to destroy as many chambers as possible. The Council's plan was to eliminate every sleeping Eltharian dragon before Arya's call could reach them. Some of the chambers were in neutral space where human ships could reach them, but others were deep in Council territory, including 2 that were actually hidden on Council homeworlds. Amanda told Lisa that they had maybe days before the death squads reached their targets. Lisa forwarded this information to Fleet. Admiral Rebecca Hart. Rebecca called an emergency meeting with President Bennett and the military leadership. The discussion was heated, but the conclusion was clear. If humanity did not act immediately, the last remnants of the ancient covenant would be wiped out forever. The Council was gambling that humanity would not dare to strike into their territory. They thought humans would stay defensive and protect their own space. Rebecca proposed something audacious. Instead of defending, humanity would attack. They would launch simultaneous strikes on Council military installations, supply lines, and communication hubs. They would target the death squads heading for the stasis chambers. They would hit the Council so hard and so fast that they would not have time to react. President Bennett listened to the plan and understood what it would mean. This was not just war. This was total war. This was humanity betting everything on one massive gamble. She thought about Nicole Foster and the 3,000 dead. She thought about the 35 crew members who died when the Destiny's Edge was destroyed. She thought about Arya's sister murdered in her sleep. She thought about all the lies and all the suppression of truth. Then she made her decision. I authorized the operation. That evening, President Bennett gave another speech. This one was broadcast not just to humanity but to every species in the galaxy. She spoke about the massacre at Frontier 7. She spoke about the Council's lies and their betrayal of their sacred duty. She spoke about the ancient covenant and the truth that had been buried for 20,000 years. She spoke about Arya and Eclipse and what they represented. She spoke about humanity's forgotten history and rightful place among the stars. And then she said the words that would echo through history. She said the Galactic Council had crossed the line. She said they had destroyed human ships and murdered human people. She said they had tried to steal humanity's history and bury the truth. She said the Council had tried to exterminate the last survivors of the civilization that saved the galaxy. She said that humanity would not kneel, would not surrender, would not back down. She ended with a simple declaration. The Council wanted war, and humanity would show them what human fury truly meant. As the speech ended, Fleet Admiral Rebecca Hart gave the order. The human fleet launched from hidden bases across the galaxy, hundreds of ships appearing in Council space like ghosts. Secret weapons humanity had been building were finally unleashed, and the galaxy would never be the same. The war erupted across dozens of systems simultaneously in a way that caught the Galactic Council completely off guard. Human ships appeared out of nowhere, striking at military installations that the Council thought were safe, and secure Fleet Admiral Rebecca Hart commanded from the bridge of her flagship, the Retribution, a massive warship that represented the best of human engineering. The Retribution was unlike any ship the Council had seen before. It was built in secret over the past decade, using designs that violated every Council treaty on weapons development. The ship could generate shields that phased in and out of normal space, making it nearly impossible to target. Its weapon systems used quantum destabilization technology that could tear apart enemy vessels at the molecular level. Rebecca stood on the bridge, watching the tactical displays as her fleet engaged Council forces across 3 star systems at once. Her orders were clear and brutal. Hit them hard, hit them fast, and give them no time to recover. The first major engagement happened at the Kryn military shipyard in the Theta Centauri system. A Council fleet of 20 warships was docked there for repairs and resupply. They never had a chance to launch. Human ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel directly on top of the shipyard. Quantum mines phased through the station shields and detonated inside the docking bays. The explosions tore through ship hulls and station infrastructure with devastating efficiency. Within minutes, the entire facility was destroyed along with the fleet that had been resting there. The Kryn commanders sent desperate messages demanding to know how humanity had developed such weapons. Rebecca did not bother responding. She simply moved her fleet to the next target. Meanwhile, Lisa Morgan had been given command of a special operations group. Her mission was to reach the stasis chambers before the Council death squads could destroy them. She had 3 fast attack ships under her command, along with Aria Eclipse and teams of specially trained soldiers. Their first target was a chamber located on a moon in the Vela. System intelligence reports said that a Council death squad was already on site. Preparing to destroy the chamber, Lisa pushed her ships to maximum speed, racing against time. They arrived to find 4 Council vessels in orbit and ground troops already. At the chamber entrance, Eclipse did not wait for orders. The Dragon launched himself from the cargo bay into space. His body glowed with energy, and he flew toward the Council ships with incredible speed. The Council crews panicked when they saw him. They opened fire with everything they had, but Eclipse simply flew through the weapons fire as if it meant nothing. He landed on the hull of the lead ship, and his claws tore through the armor like paper. The ship began venting atmosphere and spinning out of control. The other 3 vessels tried to retreat, but Lisa's attack ships were already on them. Human fighters swarmed around the Council vessels using hit-and-run tactics that overwhelmed their targeting systems. Within minutes, all 4 Council ships were either destroyed or disabled. On the surface, Kate Sullivan led a ground team to secure the chamber. They found the Council death squad attempting to plant explosives that would collapse the entire cavern system. Kate's team engaged them in a fierce firefight. The Council troops were well trained, but they had never faced humans who fought with such fury and determination. Kate herself took down 3 enemy soldiers while advancing through a hail of weapons fire. Her team secured the chamber with only minutes to spare. Inside, they found an intact stasis pod containing an Aelthari warrior. Maya Rodriguez worked quickly to decode the wake sequence. The pod opened and the warrior emerged. His name was Theron, and he was confused and disoriented until Arya spoke to him in the ancient language. She explained what had happened and how the Guardians had betrayed their duty. Theron's eyes blazed with anger. He looked at Eclipse and nodded in recognition. Then he looked at the humans and spoke in a voice that the translators struggled to render. He thanked them for freeing him and swore that he would fight beside humanity against the traitor council. This scene repeated itself across the galaxy, human strike teams racing to reach Stasis Chambers, fierce battles with council death squads, Elthari and dragons awakening to find themselves in a galaxy that had forgotten them. Each awakening added new strength to humanity's cause. The Elthari were warriors and scholars who had survived the greatest war the galaxy had ever known. The dragons were living weapons capable of feats that defied physics and logic. Together with humanity, they began turning the tide of the war. But the council was not defenseless. They had superior numbers and thousands of years of military experience. Admiral Zekathor reorganized his forces and began counterattacking. The Kryn brought their gravity-warping dreadnoughts into battle. These massive vessels could create localized gravity wells that crushed smaller ships like tin cans. The first time humanity encountered them, they lost 6 destroyers before they understood what they were facing. But human engineers were nothing if not adaptable. Maya Rodriguez, working with awakened Althari scientists, developed quantum mines that could phase through normal space. These mines would materialize inside the gravity wells and detonate, creating destructive interference patterns. When the Kryn dreadnoughts tried to use their gravity weapons again, they found their own power being turned against them. The gravity wells collapsed inward, crushing the dreadnoughts themselves. The Talarian Empire deployed their planet crackers. These were enormous weapons platforms designed to destroy entire worlds. They moved slowly, but their firepower was apocalyptic. Rebecca Hart knew that a direct confrontation would be suicide. Instead, she used swarm tactics. Thousands of small AI-guided ships, each one barely larger than a fighter. They moved in coordinated patterns that overwhelmed the planet crackers' targeting systems. The giant weapons could destroy dozens or even hundreds of the small ships, but there were always more. The swarms closed in from every angle and attached themselves to the weapons platforms. Then they detonated simultaneously, tearing the planet crackers apart from within. The Vex Collective tried to hack human computer systems. They were masters of electronic warfare and had infiltrated the networks of every species they had ever fought. But humanity had learned paranoia from years of dealing with the Council. Human ships used isolated networks with no wireless connections. Critical systems had analog backups that could not be hacked. When the Vex tried to infiltrate, they found themselves locked out completely. Worse, the human AI systems detected the intrusion attempts and traced them back to their source human. Hackers then launched counterattacks that crashed Vex command networks across entire sectors. Kate Sullivan became known throughout the fleet for her defense of awakening chambers. She led a team that successfully held off a Council battalion for 6 hours while 3 Aelthari and 2 dragons completed their wake sequence. The Council troops outnumbered her team 20-1. They had artillery and air support. But Kate refused to give ground. She and her soldiers fought from cover using every trick and tactic they knew. When ammunition ran low, they improvised with explosives made from ship components. When their position was about to be overrun, the newly awakened dragons emerged from the chamber. The Council troops broke and ran at the sight of the ancient creatures. One dragon, whose name translated as Skyfire, flew over the battlefield and incinerated the Council artillery with a single breath. The other dragon, called Nightwing, used her abilities to create illusions that terrified the enemy soldiers. Kate's defense of that chamber became legendary. Recruitment offices across human space were flooded with volunteers who wanted to fight like she did. Maya Rodriguez made breakthrough after breakthrough working with Aelthari technology, figured out how to speed up the awakening process, cutting the time from hours to minutes. She developed new shield systems based on ancient designs that could withstand 10 times more damage than standard human shields. She even found a way to integrate dragon fire into human weapons, creating handheld energy weapons that could burn through Council armor. The war raged for weeks, and the casualties on both sides were staggering. Humanity lost colonies and stations to Council counterattacks. The Council lost entire fleets to human ambushes and awakened dragon strikes. But slowly, surely humanity was winning. More Aelthari woke with each passing day. More dragons emerged from their long sleep. The ancient covenant was being reborn, and the council was terrified. Admiral Zekthor made one final desperate gamble. He gathered the largest fleet the council had assembled in centuries, over 1,000 warships from every member species. Their target was the Nexus Gate, the largest jump point nexus in the galaxy. If the council controlled the nexus, they could cut off human supply lines and split the human fleet. If humanity lost the nexus, the war would turn against them. Rebecca Hart knew this battle would decide everything. She gathered every available ship and headed to the nexus at maximum speed. The two fleets met in the space around the massive jump gate. The battle that followed was the largest space combat in recorded history. Thousands of ships fighting across a volume of space larger than most star systems. The council had numbers, but humanity had desperation and fury. Rebecca commanded from the Retribution, coordinating her forces with precision. She used the gate itself as cover, drawing council ships into crossfire zones. She sacrificed smaller vessels to create openings for her capital ships. She asked her crews for everything they had, and they gave it willingly. Lisa fought in the thick of the battle, leading strike teams that boarded council vessels' area, and Eclipse flew through space, engaging enemy ships directly. The dragon's power was terrifying to behold. Eclipse could generate energy fields that crushed ships. He could breathe fire that burned in the vacuum of space. He could move faster than missiles and hit harder than torpedoes. But even with all this, the battle was turning against humanity. The council fleet was simply too large. Human ships were being destroyed faster than they could be replaced. The Retribution itself took heavy damage, and Rebecca knew they could not hold much longer. Then something incredible happened. Dimensional portals began opening across the battlefield. Through them came dragons. Dozens of them, each one ridden by an Aelthari warrior. They came from chambers that had awakened in response to Aria's call. They came from across the galaxy to join this fight. Their ships followed behind them, ancient vessels powered by technologies that made council ships look like toys. The awakened Covenant forces hit the council fleet like a hammer. Dragons tore through council formations with devastating power. Aelthari ships unleashed weapons that bent reality itself. The council fleet that had seemed unstoppable moments before began to crumble. Ships broke formation and tried to retreat. Entire squadrons surrendered rather than face the ancient wrath. Admiral Zekthor watched his fleet disintegrate around him. He tried to rally his forces, but it was too late. The tide had turned completely. Rebecca Hart did not give him a chance to escape. She ordered all ships to target Zekthor's flagship. The Retribution led the attack, its quantum weapons tearing through the enemy shields. The flagship tried to flee, but Eclipse caught it. The dragon landed on the hull and ripped open the bridge. Zekthor and his command crew were captured alive. Rebecca wanted them to stand trial for their crimes. The Battle of the Nexus Gate was over humanity, and the awakened Covenant had won. But as the cheering began, Lisa received a priority message from Aria. The elf woman's face was pale with fear. She said she was detecting catastrophic energy readings from dark space. The barrier that held the Devourers was failing. Admiral Zekthor and his faction had actually done it. They had begun the process to release the Devourers, thinking they could bargain with them. Now the ancient enemy was breaking free, and if someone did not stop them, the entire galaxy would burn. The victory celebration aboard the Retribution died instantly. When Aria collapsed to the deck, Lisa rushed to her side and found the elf woman trembling with her eyes glowing. An intense silver eclipse roared from outside the ship, and his cry echoed through the hull, making everyone freeze. Aria spoke in a voice that seemed to come from far away. She said, the barrier was failing. She said the Devourers were waking. She said dark space itself was tearing apart as the ancient prison began to collapse. Fleet Admiral Rebecca Hart demanded to know how much time they had. Aria looked at her with ancient eyes, filled with terrible knowledge. She said they had maybe hours before the breach became irreversible. Rebecca immediately contacted President Claire Bennett on Earth. The president listened to the report and understood what it meant. The war with the Council suddenly seemed small compared to what was coming. If the Devourers broke free, nothing else would matter. Claire asked what could be done. Aria explained that the barrier could be repaired, but it required someone to enter dark space itself. Dark space was the realm between dimensions where reality worked differently. It was where the Devourers had been imprisoned for 20,000 years. To repair the barrier would require massive amounts of energy fed directly into the dimensional anchors. It would also require someone to physically guide the repair from inside dark space. Arya said the dragons were designed for this. They could survive in dark space where normal matter would simply cease to exist, but they would need power, more power than any single ship could provide. Maya Rodriguez was already running calculations. She looked up from her console with a grim expression. She said they would need at least a dozen capital ships. The ships would have to enter dark space and overload their reactors in a controlled sequence. The energy release would power the dragons and allow them to seal the breach, but every ship that went in would be destroyed. Every crew member would die. The bridge of the retribution fell silent. Everyone understood what this meant. Rebecca Hart stood tall and looked around at her crew. She said that the retribution would lead the mission. She called for volunteers, knowing that she was asking people to die. Every single person on the bridge stepped forward. Word spread through the fleet, and within an hour, Rebecca had more volunteers than she needed. Captains of 12 other capital ships contacted her and said they were ready. These were veterans who had fought in every major battle of the war. They understood what was at stake, and they were willing to pay the price. President Bennett gave her authorization. Though her voice was thick with emotion, she said that humanity would remember their sacrifice. She said their names would be honored for all time. Rebecca chose her ships carefully. She picked vessels that had already taken heavy damage in the Battle of the Nexus Gate, ships that might not survive another major engagement anyway. She picked crews that were veterans who understood exactly what they were volunteering for. Among the volunteers was a young woman named Linda Foster. She was the daughter of Nicole Foster, the commander who had died defending Frontier 7. Linda had joined the military immediately after her mother was killed. She had fought in 6 major battles and earned 3 commendations for bravery. When Rebecca tried to refuse her volunteering, Linda looked the admiral in the eye. She said her mother had stood her ground against impossible odds. She said she would do no less. Rebecca understood and accepted her into the mission. Lisa, Maya, and Kate all wanted to go, but Rebecca refused them. She said they were needed to help rebuild after this was over. She said they had to survive to tell the story. Lisa argued, but Rebecca was firm. However, Arya and Eclipse had to go. They were the only ones who knew how to actually perform the repair. Eclipse could survive dark space, but Arya was more fragile. The dragon would have to protect her using his own life force. It would drain him, possibly kill him, but there was no other way. The fleet assembled at the coordinates Arya provided. It was a point in deep space far from any star where the fabric of reality was thin. Sensors showed strange readings. Space itself seemed to ripple and warp. Through the distortions they could see something, moving massive shapes that defied description. The Devourers were already testing the weakened barrier. Rebecca gave the order, and 13 ships moved forward into the distortion. The moment they crossed the threshold, everything changed. Dark space was not black, it was every color and no color at once. Physics did not work the same way here. Up and down lost meaning. Time seemed to flow in multiple directions. The ships held formation, but their instruments went haywire. Only the dragon seemed unaffected. Eclipse flew ahead with Arya clinging to his back, protected by a bubble of his energy. Behind him came 6 other dragons that had awakened. They began singing a song that resonated through dimensions. The Devourers noticed them immediately. The creatures surged forward, and for the first time, humanity got a clear look at the ancient enemy. They were enormous biomechanical constructs that seemed to be made of living darkness. They had no fixed shape, constantly shifting and reforming. Where they moved, space itself was consumed and converted into more of their mass. They were hunger given form. The human ships formed a defensive perimeter around the dragons. The Devourers attacked, and the battle that followed was unlike anything anyone had experienced. Weapons, fire behaved strangely, and dark space missiles curved in impossible directions. Energy beams split into multiple streams. But the human crews adapted. They had trained for years to fight in impossible conditions. They used their ships as shields, protecting the dragons while they worked. Rebecca coordinated the defense from the retribution. She watched as ship after ship took damage from the Devourer attacks. The creatures could tear through shields and armor with their touch. Each attack consumed matter and energy, feeding the Devourer collective. But Rebecca kept her crews focused. She reminded them why they were here. She reminded them what was at stake area, and the dragons reached the dimensional anchors. These were massive structures that existed, partially in normal space and partially in dark space. They were what held the barrier together. The Devourers had been eroding them for weeks, ever since Zekthor had begun tampering with the system's eclipse, and the other dragons positioned themselves. Around the anchors, they began channeling energy, but it was not enough. They needed more power. Rebecca gave the order. The first ship, the destroyer Valiant, moved into position and began overloading its reactor. The crew had minutes to complete the sequence. The captain, a man named Stephen Blake, gave a final message to his family. Then the reactor went critical. The explosion was captured and channeled by the dragons. The energy flowed into the anchors and the barrier began to stabilize. But it was only the beginning. One by one, the ships moved into position and sacrificed themselves. Each explosion fed more power to the dragons. Each sacrifice made the barrier stronger. The crew sang as they died, old songs from Earth, songs about courage and sacrifice and standing against the darkness. Linda Foster was on the 8th ship to go. She thought about her mother as she helped set the reactor to overload. She thought about the 3,000 people who died at Frontier 7. She thought about how this sacrifice would save billions. She smiled as the reactor reached critical mass. Rebecca Hart waited until 11 ships had been sacrificed. The barrier was almost stable, but it needed one more push. She ordered the retribution into position. Her crew did not hesitate. They had known from the beginning that their admiral would not ask them to do anything. She would not do herself. Rebecca stood on the bridge as the countdown began. She thought about her life and her career. She thought about the war and what humanity had accomplished, had no regrets. As the reactor began its final sequence, Rebecca sent one last message to Earth. She said to tell everyone that they had held the line. She said to tell humanity that they had remembered what it meant to sacrifice for the greater good. Said that the Devourers would not pass. The retribution exploded in a burst of energy that lit up dark space like a newborn star. The dragons caught the energy and channeled it into the anchors. The barrier sealed. The dimensional walls solidified. The Devourers were trapped once more, imprisoned behind a barrier stronger than before. Eclipse and the other dragons had poured everything they had into the repair. Several of the dragons fell into deep hibernation. Immediately, Eclipse himself was barely conscious. Area was unconscious, in his claws drained completely by the psychic effort. But they had done it. The barrier would hold for another 20,000 years, maybe longer. Back in normal space, the waiting fleet watched as the dimensional distortion collapsed. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then a single ship emerged. It was a small courier vessel piloted by one of the Aelthari. Inside were Arya and Eclipse, along with the 3 dragons who had not fallen into hibernation. They were alive, but barely. The cost had been devastating. 13 ships and over 3,000 volunteers were gone. Rebecca Hart, who had led humanity through its greatest war, was dead, but the galaxy was saved. The news spread quickly. Humanity mourned its heroes. Memorial services were held on every human world. The names of every person who died in dark space were recorded in a monument built on Earth. President Bennett declared a day of remembrance, but the war was not quite over. There was still the matter of the Galactic Council. The remaining council members were brought before a tribunal. Humans, Aelthari, and representatives from the few council species who had refused to participate in the madness. Admiral Zekthor and his co-conspirators were found guilty of genocide and crimes against the entire galaxy. They had destroyed stasis chambers. They had murdered innocent civilians. They had attempted to unleash the Devourers. The sentence was exile to a prison world with no technology. They would spend the rest of their lives reflecting on what they had done. The Galactic Council was formally dissolved. In its place, a new organization was created. The Covenant of Stars was reborn as a true alliance of equals. Humanity took its place as a founding member alongside the Helthari and the awakened dragons. Other species were invited to join, but only if they accepted the truth about history. The lies and deceptions of the old council were exposed for all to see. Some species were ashamed and asked forgiveness. Others were angry but eventually accepted the new reality. The galaxy was changing and there was no going back. 6 months after the battle, Lisa stood in a memorial garden on Earth. The garden was dedicated to Admiral Rebecca Hart and all who had fallen in dark. Space Area stood beside her. The elf woman had recovered, but she moved more slowly now. The ordeal in dark space had aged her in ways that were hard to explain. Eclipse rested nearby in a smaller form. The dragon had learned to compress his size so he could move among humans more easily. He was still recovering from the massive energy expenditure. Kate Sullivan had been promoted and given command of a new ship, Maya. Rodriguez was working with Althari scientists to integrate ancient technology into human vessels. Both of them visited the memorial regularly. Lisa looked up at the stars and spoke aloud. She said that the council had thought humanity would stay weak. She said they thought humans had forgotten what they were capable of. She said they had been wrong. Arya smiled sadly and placed a hand on Lisa's shoulder. She said that humanity had never lost its strength. She said the fury and courage were always there waiting to be remembered. She said the galaxy would never forget what happened when you pushed humanity too far. Lisa nodded and looked at the memorial stones. Each one bore the name of someone who had died in the war: scientists and soldiers and civilians, people who had never wanted to fight, but who stood up when it mattered. Rebecca Hart's stone was the largest below. Her name were the words she had spoken in her final message. They held the line. New ships were launching from Earth every day now, mixed crews of humans, Elthari, and other species. They were searching for the remaining stasis chambers. They were awakening the last sleepers.